Yo, what is up everyone? Tachi here. So today we are going to be making a video in regards to some criticism that I received due to the Should You Pull video that I released maybe 2 days ago. So I'm going to go ahead and say a couple things first before we get into it. I'm going to tell you first how I make my videos, where I get my information from, and more or less just my general opinion on the topic. I suppose to some extent I will say ahead of time, unless the video that I'm talking about is math related, so it's just pure math, everything I say is just opinionated. They might be based on facts, like on JP server stuff. Like for example, if I say blah 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 is good because JP server uses that, so it's going to be in our meta. That is technically based on a fact, but there's always a possibility of us EN players or Asia players as well having a completely different meta. So it's technically an opinion, even if it is based on a fact. So just keep that in mind. And an example of that would be like the next 4 banner video that I made earlier in the month, right? Something like that was based on the order list that JP got, but clearly we have not been following that. So that's an example of something that should be a fact becoming untrue due to things that are completely out of my control. So first thing I'm going to say is the process of creating a video. Now, even though I don't edit videos much, I do edit to some extent, mostly just cuts. Obviously I do cuts, I throw in things on top of images, usually not much, but I don't do any like super fancy editing. We're not all about that here, and frankly speaking, I don't know how to edit like that either, so that's kind of outside of my realm. But something that you guys might not know is that I typically record somewhere around 2 to 3 times the length of the video that you guys end up seeing. So for example, in the last video that I posted, as well as that video, the violence and resistance should you pull video, I usually record maybe like 20 to 40 minutes worth of content, I guess you could call it, and I edit it down to somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. So occasionally there are situations where I cut out something that I probably should have kept, and it's okay to call me out on that. Obviously you wouldn't know that I might have said it, and there's no way I'm going to remember what I did and did not include, right? Because I talk a lot in those 20 to 40 minutes. Sometimes there are things that I don't include. Sometimes I don't include them purposefully. Sometimes I don't include them because I just didn't notice they were there. Something you guys have to realize is that when you're editing a video that's 30 minutes long, it doesn't just take you 30 minutes to edit it. You're not just watching it once. You're watching it so many times that it ends up taking a lot longer than the actual video length itself. So sometimes these videos will take me maybe double or triple the time that it takes based on the actual length of the video I recorded. So basically I record for 30 minutes. I probably spend another hour or 2 hours editing it, and then I rewatch it after I edited it, and if it sounds fine, I usually put it up. Obviously I can catch some mistakes, but I can't catch them all. You guys have probably seen it before. There was actually a situation last month where I said something incorrectly and I had to edit it out post-processing on YouTube's end because I had already uploaded the video, and YouTube does not allow you to basically edit it to add in another clip to explain stuff. We can't do that on YouTube, so the only thing I can do is just remove it. So that's something you guys have to be aware of in the first place. I know some of you guys may not be familiar with that, so it's kind of important to this topic. So then the last thing that I want to clarify is, where do I get my information from? So again, as you guys know, I have a couple friends, JP players. Some of them have already stopped playing, some of them still play, but generally speaking, I have an idea of how JP is at the moment, and I usually ask them for their opinion on topics, and then I also throw in my 2 cents as well, and then I consolidate that into an idea for a video, right? So when it comes to things that I say, they might not necessarily be true based on the current state of the game. Like for example, a weapon that I consider bad might not be a bad weapon today, but when I say it's bad, I'm referring to things like the stats are not that good. We will probably get a power creep. The main skill is not good. It has a bad multiplier. We will eventually get a weapon with better multiplier, or sub skill is literally trash. For example, something with replenishing magic, like a sword with replenishing magic, would be garbage. That is not a good weapon. But because of our lack of weapons in the current global server, we don't exactly have much of a choice. So to some extent, I understand why there might be some criticism based on that. However, at the end of the day, again, it's just my opinion. Even if the weapon is inherently bad long term, even medium term, who knows? It could be 6 months and the weapon could already be power creeped or less. We really have no idea. So when I say something is bad, I don't necessarily mean that it's bad today. I'm talking about in the medium long term, even sometimes short term. Some weapons are honestly not good at all right now, but you just have no choice. So anyways, let's get into the person person's comment ahead of time, please don't go into the comments finding it, and please don't harass this person. I take criticism fine, even though we went into a 10 comment chain, which was quite long, but that's just typical. That's how I usually talk to people on text format, which is why I prefer to talk to people instead of just, it's sort of like arguing. I don't really like doing it. I do it on Twitter, I do it on Reddit, I do it on YouTube. It's really the same thing no matter where. So let's just get into it, and I will try to address it as much as I can. And then if you guys want, also feel free to leave your comment down below, or whatever you want. If you agree, disagree, if you have other opinions, it's fine. Let's use this video as a time to see what other people think about this topic. But first thing I'll say is that even something related to math and statistics is not necessarily, how should I say it? It's not necessarily a fact per se. Like, I'll give you an example. I have a disagreement with someone the other day on Discord in regards to the last slot in a min-sorks grid. Now, the thing that they're trying to say is that, for example, the 20th book in a grid on a sorcerer is not as impactful as having a one staff in the grid. So having that last slot be a staff is more impactful than having the 20th sorc item, right? Now, mathematically, he's correct, right? The 20th book will not increase percentage-wise your debuff numbers as much as it will increase your healing if you were to have a staff. Like, that's pretty easy logic for you to understand. But it's not really a fact-based thing, because it depends on how you weigh things. It's just an opinion, even though it's based on math. So that I'm going to say ahead of time, just so you guys are aware of my type of thinking when coming into topics like this. So let's read the comment from the start. There's some weird misinformation in this video, namely as a min-sorc. This is actually a fantastic staff for any day with a staff demon, therefore half your fights on average, which is true. That support skill is fantastic as it will work across your whole grid and provide a meaningful impact. As you cannot get support boon on a staff, and healing support is basically worthless for non-clerics, skills such as this one are a way that you can slot in a staff to help with demon while not hurting your support nearly as much. On top of that, the fantastic stats are nice icing on the cake. Now, in regards to this claim, I will agree to some of the things, but obviously I'm going to have to disagree with some things. First, I don't think that is misinformation. That is just an opinion. I can both think the staff is shit and it can still be useful. Now, in regards to min-sorcs using staffs, I know it's a meta now, but I guess, like I said before, I would like you guys to remember that I'm usually basing my opinions on what players should be trying to do grid-wise based on JP. And min-sorcs in JP don't really bring staffs. They just don't. Min-sorcs min-sorc. That's it. They might split up their sorc with some instruments and instruments with sorcerer items, you know, books, whatever. But typically speaking, only clerics run staff. Now, I'm aware, obviously, I run a guild. My min-sorcs do have staffs on staff day. But I don't think that just because you can slot it in to help you in demon is a sufficient reason to spend perhaps 150 if you get really lucky, but more than likely somewhere between 1200 and 4500 crystal just to get the staff if you're a min-sorc. I personally don't think that's worth it. You can disagree with me, but that's not misinformation. And in regards to whether or not the weapon is good, I will agree something like support boon is impossible to get on a staff, and healing support is not impactful in a grid when you are not a cleric, right? Because you only have 2 to 5 staffs. So you only have a 2 to 5 chance in terms of weapons that can even proc recovery support. So it's not worth it. So the skill itself for a min-sorc is actually probably one of, if not the best skill that a min-sorc can use. But that doesn't mean that the weapon is good. And it definitely doesn't mean that you should pull for it. Now, in regards to the stats, you're right. The stats are good. But again, it depends on how you weigh the demon. Personally, I don't think that demon is as important as you guys think it is. I've won battles where we lost both demons. I've lost battles where we won both demons. Demon is very impactful right now, but the value of demon will go down as the game progresses. Nightmares are significantly more important, and so are base stats. Demons are important, but that's mostly a current meta thing. Feel free to go ask other JP players. I don't base the opinion just on them, but even based on my own experience in global server. And sometimes demon is just not that impactful. A really well-timed justice is usually a lot bigger deal than a demon, because again, if you guys are unaware, demon usually just leads to one down. That's just what it is. It leads to a down. And yeah, one down could help sway, because again, the second demon is usually around like 5 minutes, so you probably down them and there's probably going to be 3 to 4 minutes left, but they can turn that around. So there's a limit to how worthy or how impactful it can be, and sometimes it's just not worth gimping your min-sorcs to have everyone on 5 staffs. Sometimes it's just not worth it. And especially on top of that, something else that you have to keep in mind mind is that if you are a Minsork and you already have staffs, which you probably do, there's even less reason for you to pull on this because you're pulling for a minuscule increase in overall ability, right? You're basically just replacing, say, Popola's staff for a slightly better staff as a Minsork. I personally don't think that's worth it, but again, that's just an opinion. Now, on to the next part. Additionally, you mentioned that clerics don't care about attack stat, and then it could be 0, but less than a minute later, you mentioned that you would like for your cleric to pick it up because of the M attack buff. That buff from the staff will be based on his M attack, and so the stats still matter. Obviously, less so than Minstrel and Sork, but it's not completely meaningless. Now, I will say a few things. One, I was actually not 100% sure before I posted the video whether or not stuff like that, especially on the main skill itself, is based on your own stats. So that's my bad. But also, I would like to point out that that's a hyperbole. I don't literally mean that a cleric could have 0 attack stat and they literally wouldn't match. Like, I'm clearly talking about them healing. I'm talking about healing. That's why I'm saying that. The cleric's main job is to heal. They don't care about attack stat. And the specific hyperbole, obviously, before anyone tries to call me out on it, is the whole 0 attack part. What I'm saying is that attack is not as it's not important to a cleric. They don't care about it as much. They care about their defense. That's just a fact. Now, of course, maybe I should stick away from hyperboles because this was actually this was 2 people who thought I was being serious about that. So I'm sorry, you're right, that's my bad. It's very hard for you guys to detect my hyperboles and sarcasm because unless I'm laughing like I'm doing right now, it's hard for you guys to tell. I understand that. I'm usually pretty flat tone when it comes to voice, so I get it. People can't tell I'm being sarcastic, even if I try to be obvious. I'm just not very good at it. I have the same problem with other people in real life. It's just how it is. So I think that more or less addresses that. I didn't mean it literally. And even if I did, and let's say it was just less, I would still prefer as a cleric, at least thinking from their perspective, I would prefer if the defensive stats were the 2,000 something each and the attack stats were only 1,000 because it would mean that I would heal more. But that's a separate topic entirely. That's just how they, I guess you can say that's how they balance staffs, but it's not really balanced. That's another topic. So let's get into the final bit, and it's probably the bit where it finally comes into actual numbers, and then this comes into the part where I have to say again, just because it's based on numbers doesn't necessarily mean that you're speaking on a fact basis. Basically, like, you might be technically right, but that doesn't mean that you're actually right, and there will still be opinions based on the number, right? Because how you interpret numbers depends on a person by person basis. So let's get into it. I won't speak as confidently on Vanguard side of the argument since I don't know the role, but the defense down skills will proc across your grid, same as DC. I would assume they are overall worse than DC just due to how much everyone emphasizes DC, but I would doubt that it's by some crazy order of magnitude. It's still a support skill that is useful, unlike many other support skills on support weapons that only proc off attack, which they could never do outside shit. Now that is true, I will admit that, but we're talking about DPS here, so I'll come back to that in a second. Saying that enemy supports could just buff defense back makes no sense unless your enemies are sitting at 20 defense stacks and are capped. If their minstrels overpower your Sork stat badly, then sure, it's pointless. Otherwise, you're still contributing to the defense being lowered. The other exception is if your Sorks overpower their minstrels so hard that you keep them all negative anyways, then these debuffs get wiped after you get shit faced, so that's more pointless. And while defense down means less damage on a given attack from you, compared to DC he means, your guild is focusing that target, then everyone is reaping the benefit. I'm not trying to say that it's better than DC, I doubt that it would be, but I wouldn't just write it off as being terrible. If anything, I'd wager that the single target aspect of the weapon holds it back just as much or more so than the support skill. Now, that is true, and I'm pretty sure I said somewhere in the video in regards to AoE weapons being better because you're literally hitting more targets, but I might have edited it out, so it's entirely possible I didn't leave it there. But yes, AoE weapons are meta, even though they have slightly lower ratios and they will typically do slightly less damage, usually like 70 to 80%. Because they hit 1.5 to or 2 targets depending on the weapon, they do typically deal more consistent damage long term as opposed to swords, which again, and obviously not just swords but bows as well. So that's another topic entirely. We'll get into that in another time. So this time we are talking specifically about defense down. Is it good even if it's not as good as DC? Before we get into this, I do want to let you guys know that I do actually have some sort of semblance of like weight in terms of support skills for DPS, and typically speaking, DC is pretty much number one, undisputed. It's not even a question. You can feel free to disagree that it's not as impactful. I don't really care. That's on you guys. Number two, I'd say self-buffing skills are better. And then third, I would finally put defense down. Now, the reason why I say buffing is more important than defense down really comes comes down to two things. One, in case you guys aren't aware, defense on the enemy's side is reduced effectiveness in comparison to buffing yourself. So in the damage calculation, defense is reduced by 2/3. So defense down is not nearly as important as buffing yourself. You can pretty much kind of see this by the fact that when you think in your head, would you rather be 20 buffs fighting against an enemy with 10 stacks of defense? Or would you rather be at 10 or 5 buffs fighting against someone with 0 defense buffs? Personally, I'd rather have the 20 buffs because you do way more damage. It's not even close. It doesn't make any sense. Defense is not to be weighted in the same way that offensive stats are weighted. It's not the same at all. Defense is just not as good. That's just a fact. And then the next obvious demerit is that when you ship an opponent, all debuffs are wiped, so all the debuffing that you did just goes away. So now we have to talk about important things. The only instance in which this even makes any sense as an argument is if you are fighting an equal level guild or there is a small gap in skill and power between you and the enemy guild. If the fights are, they don't even have to be one-sided. If the fights are pretty heavily, like let's say most of my fights for that matter are either a pretty easy win or they're a pretty massive loss. It's very rare for me to get pretty even battles. So the amount of battles that this argument would even make sense in is so minuscule that I don't really consider it even to be a good argument. And then on top of that, there's a couple of other demerits that I know you might have gone into to some extent, but I really don't think that you really took into account how big of a difference it is. But that's where it comes into opinion. I personally weigh those demerits even more heavily than you do, apparently, because I really don't think that defense down is good. I really don't. I would rather buff. Now, obviously, I would rather have defense down than replenish magic. Don't get me wrong, for sure. But I would also rather buff, and I would rather DC. And those are definitely options, especially for most players who are running Salad. Only people like me who are running Specialized or Half Nightmare are the ones that really don't have a choice. Now, I made a list along with a JP just to see all the different demerits that I thought made the argument pretty null on why defense down is good. It's just personally, I don't think it is. And this is not a fact. This is an opinion. I don't care what you say. The only fact here is the number of damage increase that DC and defense down does. And I would like to point out one thing ahead of time. DC is technically a 1.5 or so increase in damage overall on your entire grid per DC. But if you have a grid full of DC, your chance to proc increases exponentially, which means that your overall increase in damage is pretty high. That's why DC grids are good, because DC is just better long term. You have a full grid of DC, your chance of proccing a DC per hit is around 70%, sometimes like 75-80%. It's quite high, and the damage increase that you get is quite substantial, especially if they stack. That's why DC is good. Buffing is also good. You can go watch some JP videos. You'll probably notice that a lot of them buff up and they just get 5-6 stacks like instantly on their first weapon usage. That's pretty important to be able to buff up that quick. It's really good. It's a very good skill to have, especially the higher your stats go, it becomes even better. Defense down, on the other hand, I still say that most of your benefit from it can be wiped away, not only by dying, but when they get buffed back up, which will be pretty quick. Now, again, I did point this out. The obvious argument against what I just said is that, well, technically, that only really applies if they can get to 20 stacks, because technically, you're still reducing their defense, even if blah, 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 even if they go back to the 8 stacks that they were at, you're still technically contributing to defense on. Yeah, sure, you're technically right, but like, come on, bro. They're back to their stacks. At most, you lowered 1 stack, which by the way, you didn't. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna pop up something here where I show you what like a level 10 defense down does. It's such a small amount of defense that it's not even a stack, guys. It's that bad. You are lowering such a small amount of defense that over the entire game, even with, I think I have like 4 or 5 defense down skills, it's just, you're lowering such a small amount. It's just now, it's basically like 1 debuffer's like book. That's it. It's like 1 book's worth of defense down over an entire match. But anyway, so the first obvious demerit is, again, debuffs are raised upon death. So in an even match, if for whatever reason you even want to claim that defense down contributed to a down, first of all, I doubt that very much. But let's say it did. All of that is going to be erased the moment they come back up. So it's not a huge deal. 2, no matter how much you debuff with an auxiliary skill, 1 enemy minstrel buff will wipe it away and probably increase far more than you ever debuffed anyways. That is to say that no matter how much you're debuffing with your weapon as a DPS, 1 minstrel with 1 weapon alone can wipe wipe all of that benefit away, and the net gain is 0 basically. You pretty much just reduce their defense by 400 or so. It just doesn't matter. Now, number 3, as I said before, DC gets exponentially better the more DC weapons you have in your grid and the more stats you have, right? That's just a fact. There's no arguing against that. 4, once you factor in the 2/3 effectiveness of defense in the damage calculation, you're even lowering the effectiveness of the actual defense down itself even more than it already was. So that's another slash on that. 5, self-buffing skills are intrinsically better than defense down skills because, again, the 2/3 effectiveness means that your buffing is literally more important than your defense down. Just like literally, like number to number, defense downs are 2/3 effective. That's just how it is. And on top of that, defense down attenuation when you're getting into the negatives, again, will be even worse than buffing. Buffing only runs into attenuation at around 11th stack. So it's a little bit less common depending on how strong your minstrels are. 6, defense down scaling on the weapons themselves are significantly worse than DC per level. That is to say, for example, DC's increase in damage increases by 2.5% per level. That is to say, for example, a level 1 skill will be 1.025% increase in damage, and a level 2 would be 1.05 increase in damage, right? So the scaling is 2.5%, or however you want to notate that in English. And the defense one seems to be around 0.95%, give or take, for the defense down 2. It's just a lower rate of scaling, and obviously overall as a DPS, your defense is not going to be as high as your attack stats are. So that's another thing to add into that as well. And then number 7, the DC increase in damage is fundamentally better when accounting for buffs, because even though the percentage increase in damage might be the same, that is to say 15% is 15%, when you have a high amount of buffs, 15% of 15,000 is a lot higher number than 15% of 5,000, right? So it basically becomes an argument of later on, your DC is going to be so good and your buff is going to be so good that getting a DC proc basically means you'll one-shot someone, right? Which is great, right? Defense down is never going to do that. Even if you get them down to -10, you're not going to one-shot them. That's not how that works. That's why I don't think that defense down grids are actually worth it. I did see someone once say, I don't know where, I think it was probably in the Xeno Snow Discord, I believe they were theory crafting that running a full grid as a DPS of defense down skills might actually be better than running a DC grid because blah blah blah. It's basically the same argument, is that because you are applying it to an enemy and the entire team can technically reap the benefit of it, that it technically is a higher increase in damage than DC is, which is very flimsy reasoning. And also, I'm just going to throw in an extra note. I won't really count it as number 8. Think about the purpose of what DPS is supposed to do. What is the purpose of DPS? Is it to increase the total amount of damage that you do, or is it to kill the enemy? Now, I know this sounds like a contradiction, but I need you to really think about it. It's like the dot argument that you tried to make. What are you trying to do in this game? Are you trying to deal more damage over the long term, or are you trying to kill them? And the reason why I want you to think about that is because what you need to realize is that dot damage, effectively, you are correct, dot damage could be the highest amount of damage in an MMORPG. It probably is in most games. It has a very high percentage of damage per tick. That's true. But if you account for healing and other such factors, you realize that unlike outright killing something in one hit, if you're hitting them with dots, a small minuscule amount of increase in damage, it can be healed through. You can't do that when you get one shot, right? So you might have run into the situation, guys, when you were playing in Coliseum, is that you see an enemy, you get them low, but you don't kill them. You get them to, let's say, half HP. You get them to half HP, they just heal back up. You get them to half HP, they heal back up. You get them to half, they heal back up, right? That doesn't really disrupt them, does it? It doesn't help you in, say, Shinma, right? Because they never die. So they don't have that annoying phase where they're just like, oh, fuck, I can't do anything. I have to wait to revive, or I have to wait to get healed. There's a gap in between my healers, blah, blah, blah. Stuff like that, right? That doesn't happen if you only get them down to half. But you know what does affect them and what does make a difference when you're trying to fight for Shinma and you're killing them with weapons that aren't Shinma weapons, which is what I do when they run axe and bow, killing them. When you get a DC proc and you one-shot them, they're going to be useless for the next 3 to 4 seconds. And if they happen to get revived by a healer's heal, guess what? You hit them again and you kill them again. You want to know what happens then? Now they're down. Now one of their healers is on a 3 to 4 second cooldown for healing. Guess what? You kill them. Wait, what if they get healed again? Well, you just kill them again. It just keeps stacking like that. That's why killing them is your end goal. It's not necessarily to increase the total amount of damage. That's what I'm trying to say. I hope I kind of explain it right, because it's sort of a conundrum. It's like it doesn't quite make sense when when you don't really think deeply about it, but it just makes perfect sense if you're playing the game, because your end goal really is to just kill all 5 of them. It's not to do a bunch of damage. You just want them dead. You want them dead so you could ship them, so you can kill ships, so you can come back, so you could repeat the process over and over again. That's what you want to do. Unless, of course, you're running a sneaky strategy where, I don't know, maybe you are like letting them ship you once or twice and losing the first Shinma so that you can get more points on the second Shinma or whatever, which is sort of a pretty decent strategy. There's some scenarios where it's not a great idea, and it's definitely not worth risking it against an even guild, but yeah. Anyways, that's just my thoughts. Again, guys, please do not go to harass a person. I don't want you guys to do that. Just use this video as a form of discussion. Hopefully I didn't ramble much. I'm probably not going to edit this one down at all, so it will probably be like 30 something minutes long. Hopefully you guys watched through some of it or most of it. That would be great for me. If you did watch through most of it and you heard this, say, I don't know, hashtag Starry sucks. That'll be nice. Yes, if you watched this far into it, all 3 of you guys, say hashtag Starry sucks. And also, you know what, go down into the description. I don't usually do quote unquote sponsors. It's not really a sponsor. I'm going to put down my Webull down there and probably my Robinhood as well. In case you guys didn't know, I do actually do stock trading as a living for some extent right now. And obviously most of that just comes down to the virus that we've had for the last 5 months. So everything down here is closed. No one's really hiring. So I'm making use of my expertise, which is indeed stock trading. I do actually have a couple licenses. So just ahead of time, some of you guys might not get it, but there are legal laws in regards to this. This is not financial advice. I don't have the exact series that I need to even say that it's financial advice, so don't take it as financial advice. But if you guys sign up for Webull or Robinhood and you deposit $100, you will get a free stock. Actually, Webull will give you 2 free stocks, and some of them can actually be up to $1,400, and some people have gotten pretty lucky. As a matter of fact, when I signed my friend up, both of us got a stock. He got a $40 stock, free money by the way, you can just withdraw, and I got a $400 stock. Lots of fucking money, guys. A lot of money for free. So if you guys are interested in that, feel free to go down to the description down below, sign up, set it up, deposit in the first month that you have the account, and we'll both get money. And yes, that is the thing, we both get stocks, so it's a win-win for both of us. You really don't lose anything. Anyways, guys, that is the end of this video. Again, hit the like, subscribe if you want to see more content. I am out. Have a nice day.